time off after the remarkable weekend that you pulled off again in an annual conference, and all of your incredible talent and skill in keeping so many different balls in the air. There are many, many groups which really appreciate that work. So thank you. And thank you to each person who is here. It's always just a gift and a true honor to be with you. So David Swanson has gotten me into the habit of capitalizing the word beyond whenever I write World Beyond War. And I think that's important because, it's not enough. It just will not be enough for us to do anything less than get to a point of a world beyond war, a world that leaves war behind us. Clearly, we're sort of living on borrowed time, it seems. And not only can we not afford to keep pouring our resources into the Pentagon, it's ever more clear that Mother Earth can't afford our war-making species. So the time is now to really bump up our efforts in a sense. And I was saying to a group with Veterans for Peace, I think maybe 2 weekends ago, how dare I ever say to the people I'm looking at on this screen and who are gathered right now, oh, you should really work harder, you should do more. So maybe let's just say, don't get tired. I want to tell you about somebody I hope some of you know about. His name is Sinan Antoon. And following the shock and awe bombing of Iraq, this man, one of Iraq's most brilliant novelists, wrote a book called The Corpse Washers. And his main character, Jawed, was somebody who was lamenting the fact that his job, his profession of washing the corpses before burial in Iraq, was now a job that demanded so much of him because there were so many rising numbers of people killed. And this was after the shock and awe bombing and the invasion. And so he describes, this main character, the condition of Iraq after the United States invasion. And of course, this was the second major invasion, the first being in 1990, and that following all the horrid years of economic sanctions. But he said that in the past, yes, there had been differences, like you could say streams that separated Shia and Sunni Iraqis, Shia and Sunni Muslims. But he said the war came like an earthquake, and those streams turned into much more huge fissures and rivers, torrents of blood quickly filled in those chasms that had opened up. And people began to see on the other side the enemy as a sort of disfigured monster whom they could never forgive or with whom they could never reconcile. And then it was as though there were cement blocks permanently dividing people. And this is what war does. And we're hearing in real time, very much in the aching present, Yuri Shelyazhenko in Kyiv talk about how the Russian invasion has created just those kinds of fissures and rising levels of enmity and hatred. And yet we hear Yuri continually, steadfastly call on all of us to find humane alternatives to war, to search for a world beyond war. And I think it's so important that right now, in solidarity with Yuri Shelyazhenko in Ukraine, is our board treasurer, John Brewer, and several other people who come from Japan and the United States to be with Yuri. So I want to go back to what Jürgen Johansson had said in the very beginning of our conference. Jürgen said, when somebody asked him, well, what do you do when a military conflict has already broken out? And he was kind of abrupt in his answers, and I really appreciated it because it's easier to remember these little 2 and 3 word answers. His answer was, go there, go there. And I think that's what World Beyond War does. World Beyond War goes to the places where people are suffering, where people are broken, to the places where children are orphaned and families are bereaved, and groups of people, rising numbers of people, are displaced internally. World Beyond War goes there. And we sometimes are not able to do it with physical presence these days. I mean, we live in a time of ongoing pandemic, and we live in a time when consumption of jet fuel requires a lot of very, very serious justification. So how else can we go there? Well, people can certainly go to places where our brothers and sisters are afflicted by war through conferences, through starting chapters in other countries, which has been happening in wonderful new ways throughout the world. And of course, through having the kinds of coursework and studying the kinds of books that World Beyond War has supplied us with. I think about Rivera's son's books and David's books and the ASSG book, A Guide to Security. So that's one of the things that I think we have to do, is to go there, and also to be in solidarity with people who do experience imprisonment and possible torture and possible disappearance because of the war makers. For most of us in World Beyond War chapters, I think it's safe to say that as we raise our voices, as we escalate our actions, it's not so likely that we would be imprisoned or tortured or disappeared. But that's not true for people all throughout the world. And so it's an incredibly important time for us to extend our reach, to be increasingly conscious of what is happening to people in, for instance, in Africa, especially in places where the United States is operating military bases, to be increasingly conscious of how we can build rapport and true friendship and relationships with people in China, especially as China is surrounded by United States and other NATO military bases. So how do we go there? How do we build that solidarity? How do we create many new jobs as organizers within other countries and other parts of the world? Well, one thing we indispensably have to do is collect money, raise funds, be able to find the resources to make these incredibly needed campaigns possible. So I was grateful to Greta. She offered to put up on the screen the information, including a graphic, and we can put it in the chat also, which will tell how you and your neighbors and your family members and your coworkers and others can contribute to World Beyond War, to make donations, to encourage others to make donations, to be in solidarity together through that means of sharing our resources and sharing our resources radically. I know that we're dedicated to trying to live simply and to do that more radically. And sometimes that might mean that we've got a little more largesse to make available for the kinds of work that are so important right now to build a world beyond war. I'm always grateful for the images that others have given us. And David, you've given us the image of a time when people would solve their disputes by getting involved in a duel and pace off in opposite directions, then turn around and shoot each other. We persistently learn about the horrendous ways in which bloodshed has increased following every single one of the wars that have plagued our planet. And so I want to close with the words of young Afghans taught to me in a very poignant way. They said, blood doesn't wash away blood. And of course, that's utter common sense. So let's be particularly grateful today for people like David and Jan Hartsoe, who spent an entire lifetime convincing us, persuading us, and showing us the truth of those words, that blood doesn't wash away blood. And we catch courage from one another. Courage is the ability to control our fears. We don't want to be governed by our fears, certainly, but we do want to be governed by that instinct towards sharing and building resources so that we can create that world beyond war, build a better world and build a world wherein it's easier for everybody to be good. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this conference. I surely look forward to being with you in the weeks and the months to come. And don't forget, please, everyone, give yourself a pat on the back. Job well done. And Greta, back to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kathy. So we now have 30 minutes remaining before we get kicked out of the Zoom events platform. And so you can use those final 30 minutes for networking and expo booths. So we will close this session. And as you have for the past 3 days, you'll see that lobby screen behind where you can check out our session reflections booth, which is just like a free form booth, or you can go to specific booths of our conference sponsors for those final 30 minutes. So enjoy, everyone, and we will be sending out lots of follow-up emails, probably one immediately after this with the evaluation form. So please take a few minutes to fill that out because that will influence next year's conference, and then also subsequent emails with all of the recordings once all of the recordings are available. So thanks, everyone.
Great.